Talking Buckeyes, by extension, talking Big Ten right here at the Voice of College Football. That's what we do here each and every Wednesday. We've got three of the best. Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts 247 Sports, right next to me. Tony Gerdeman. It's Buckeye Huddle. It's Buckeye Weekly is the podcast. College Football Playbook is what you need to check out right here on YouTube. Again, College Football Playbook. And below me, Kevin Noon, Buckeye Huddle. Also, the Big Me Podcast. Guys, how we doing today?
Good.
Doing well.
I took my trip out to see my kids a few days ago and was not prepared for the New England fall weather. I just assumed it was 80 or 85 every day from here on out with perfectly blue skies. I get out there and it's 53 degrees. What is going on? It's June. So back in the Buckeye State and ready to talk Ohio State football. So, Steve, I guess we'll start with the scheduling conversation, and you all three can chime in because I did not see the conversation Tony Petiti had with Rich Eisen concerning the schedule, but there seems to have been, based on previous conversations that we've all had and many others, some peeks into the future and what's being discussed and what's most likely, but he gave maybe a little bit more clarity to that.
Yeah, I guess within the next several days, we may have an idea what the future of Big Ten football looks like. I know there's been a lot of debate on the national level about the SEC and whether they should play 8 or go to 9 conference games. I think the Big Ten has been pretty steadfast at 9, and I think their new television contract kind of bears out that they are making extra money because there are extra conference games. As we joked off the air, Rutgers versus Northwestern, it may not sound like much, but when you slap that Big Ten imprint on it, boy, it gets you an extra ratings point. So, I don't know. I'm kind of ingesting here a little bit, but I think more is better than less. So I think it'll be 9 games. It'll stay with 9 games. I think that the potential is there. It sounds like that our long national nightmare of East versus West could be over. And, Luke Fickell, God bless him, at Wisconsin, better get him a division championship this year because trying to unseat Ohio State or Michigan going forward is going to be an uphill battle, I think, for the best of the best, the best of the rest, I guess is a better way to put that. So, those are some of my initial thoughts about this. And I also firmly believe in the idea of the 2 best teams playing each other from the standpoint of it gives your television partner much better value because now you may have 2 teams that are in the top 5, as we saw at the end of the last regular season with Ohio State, Michigan, both making the playoff. Potentially you could have, 2 top 5 teams playing each other. And they are playing each other not only for that championship trophy, but also for a first-round bye in the college football playoff. The loser could be relegated to having to host a playoff game as one of the 5 to 8 seeds in the playoff, and so on. So, it creates more value for your television partner. A Michigan-Purdue game gets a 7 rating. Another Michigan-Ohio State game it's a 23 rating. So I think that there is a lot of value if that's the direction that they choose to go. But those are my initial thoughts. And these guys, I know they may discuss that, but also the potential rotation of opponents. I think there's some debate about that.
Yeah, I think there are 4 schools of thought with maybe 1 protected rival, then 2, then 3, and then a flex schedule. So it sounds like we could be hearing what that is going to be. I think when you try to find 3 protected rivals for everybody in the Big Ten, you're working too hard. You're fabricating most of it. And so I am interested to see. I think everybody expects, and it may even be an open secret at this point, it will be no divisions. But I am interested to see what protected rival does USC and UCLA have? Are they given somebody from the Big Ten? Will Ohio State have 3 protected rivals? Will they have 2? So I'm looking forward to finding all of that out, and sometime later this summer, this fall, we'll get the actual schedule. But this is how you build the hype. you release things in stages, like when the NFL is like, these are the teams you're going to play next year, and then a couple months later, and this is your schedule for when you will play those teams. So you can't release everything at the same time because you want to build excitement. And I think this is one of the ways that the Big Ten can do that. And it's June, so there's not a lot else going on. And if you can keep yourself in the public spotlight with announcements like this, then do it. And you're not being ridiculed for the cowardly actions of only playing 8 conference games like the SEC.
Yeah, exactly. I think that when you look at things, and everybody else is in the news cycle right now due to what's Colorado doing with with its conference affiliation, what's going on with all this, so the Big Ten stays relevant as it's going to drop apparently this whole framework in the next 3 days, hopefully. It sounds like from that interview, and as was said, we're not going to find out a schedule. I think what they were making it sound like we won't find out next year's schedule until like October. So you got to have a ways to go, but it'll be interesting to see how many rivals each school gets, because it really does sound like it could be a varied number. And what is going to be the case? I mean, we obviously know who Ohio State's main rival is, and then we got Penn State, who believes that Ohio State's its rival, and Ohio State doesn't believe Penn State's its rival. And what's going to happen? Are they going to try and manufacture rivals with USC or UCLA? I mean, probably not, but who knows with all that. But it's a lot of fun, because I think that the question I'm asked most by people when I talk to them and they find out what I do for a living is about future schedules and things of that nature. So here you go. Here's a big healthy dose of all of that, and now we just have to kind of try and figure out what to make of it.
I would just throw in, I don't want to see USC and UCLA have anybody as another protected rival, and I can't imagine anybody on this end of the 48 wants anything to do with that either, because it sentences you to having to go out there every other year. And I mean, other than Nebraska, which I did share the comment that coming back from the Rose Bowl, I did stop off at Nebraska last year to go to a basketball game. OSU was playing there on maybe January 2nd. And it wasn't that bad of a trip. It was only 2.5 hours from LA to Omaha. So, it's not the end of the world, to say maybe you make Nebraska a protected rival, or Iowa for one of them. I don't know, but I just don't sense that anybody in the central and eastern time zones wants to be branded or tasked with having to go out there to play the same school every other year. It just makes no sense.
I think some schools would view it as a recruiting tool, as the whole Calabrasca thing that we saw before, where they want to go out there. Some schools will want to go out there because it puts them in the eyeballs and in front of the faces of California prospects, and it's and maybe that becomes even more important now that those prospects see the Big Ten as something more than it did before. So I'm interested to see. I think they're going to try to even it out. They don't want to probably punish one program more than the other, punish them by making them go out west. But I will be interested to see if there would be some programs who would be like in favor of going out there every other year.
Well, and the thing too is that everybody, the distance, as Steve said, I mean, 2.5 hours from SoCal to Lincoln. And I mean, it's not like they're having to take the train. This isn't early in the movie, The Natural, and you're having to take the train across country to go play the baseball game, and Roy Hobbs and the Whammer are on the same train and everything else. I mean, we have modern air technology, and granted, flying sucks. I mean, it does. I mean, but it's not impossible. And the time zones are probably the worst thing about it. But you sit there and it's not like these guys are necessarily having a legitimate 8 a.m. class that they're having to walk across the oval or walk across the quad of whatever their school is to go. It's mostly online and things of that nature, a lot of independent study type things. And, I'm very interested in this, but I also want to sit there, and I wish I had something to pour one out for, every other year trips to Bloomington and things like that, because I'm not necessarily going to miss dealing with Indiana State Route 37, which is tore up beyond all recognition, and just how awful that that is. But I'm also concerned about the year that Ohio State seems to draw a heavy dose of the old formerly known as Big Ten West on all of its road games, and we have to sit there and Rochambeau over if we're driving or flying.
I want to point out that I was told by Steely Dan in like 1979 that by this point in history, it'd be 90 minutes from New York to Paris. So I'm just waiting on those type of travel arrangements to be made. I'm getting ready to book my flights to Rutgers and Wisconsin. So, and I am flying to both. So that'll be fun. So
It'll be fun for the USC and UCLA to fly to all of these Big Ten college areas, but then also have to bus an hour to them from whatever city they fly into, because
Indianapolis,
fly into Indianapolis and just whichever school you're playing at that day.
It's 2 hours. It's 2 hours from LAX to UCLA, and even though it's only 20 miles, but whatever.
Right, and you sit there and you look there. I mean, you can fly into State College, you can fly into some of these places, but yeah, you're not going to be going into the West Lafayette Executive Airport or whatever. I think the travel costs would be very expensive to have to rent out like 60 Learjets or whatever to get into there. But yeah, I think that progress in this case is still a good thing, and I'm excited to see how it shapes up and what my travel schedule for 24 may potentially look like, even though we're not going to know that one definitively for a couple more months.
As I have stated a number of times here and elsewhere, I love the flex scheduling. I love the flex opponents. I don't believe that there has to be 3 permanent rivals for every school, because that is not reality. Therefore, when you look at Rutgers, Maryland, Northwestern, who is obviously attached to Illinois and no one else, USC, UCLA, why forge some type of artificial rivalry? They are the rival of each other, and much like other longstanding schools in the Big Ten, they can just remain their own rivals, and nothing artificially has to be created. To the point of the East and West, yes, that's been a debacle. That's been a nightmare in regards to forging the best matchups in a championship game. Now, if you do the layout of who would have played the 1 versus the 2 seed, you would think that it would be heavily concentrated toward the East. Now, the East would have always been represented, but the West shows up more than you would think. However, we have to consider that's just the first layer of analysis, and I've done that, and you guys have as well, I think, and going to see what would that 1 versus 2 have been, and a Western Division team would have shown up a number of times. However, their schedules would be different, and so you got to factor that in. They have a light schedule. They probably would not have shown up as many times as history would have shown us in a 1 versus 2 in the Big Ten.
Yeah, being the tallest 6th grader doesn't mean that you're going to be able to go out and beat the NBA Western Conference champion.
But Wisconsin could totally touch the net.
Yes, they can. They can stretch it up there with some of those. So I remember Jim Leonard wowing all of us way back when he could dunk a basketball at whatever height he was. All right, Kevin, you mentioned before we came on reviewing what Gene Smith had to say this week, specifically about this night affair with Michigan State that was so ballyhooed in its controversy, forcing Big Ten teams, and especially the premier Big Ten teams, to be playing night games in November.
Yeah, I'll give credit to another one of the sites out there. 11 Warriors had a podcast with Gene Smith, and the question was brought up about these November night games. And there's always been this belief of this, that it was just forbidden. It was, written into some sort of deal, and then it wasn't written into a deal, but it was still strongly worded verbally. And then lo and behold, Ohio State ends up drawing Michigan State in mid-November this year. And you got to remember, obviously, with the way that the TV contracts work out, you've got noon window, you got your 3:30 window, and you've got your 7 o'clock window. And you only have 2 schools out there that are Pacific time zones. So that means that everybody else is going to have to probably figure something out to fulfill that window that NBC is paying a pretty penny for. Well, in the interview, he said that Ohio State would not be doing those types of games moving forward, these home night games, that they did it in 23 to kind of, help out the cause. I mean, at some points you do have to kind of make some concessions. Now, I think it could be up for debate whether or not that's going to be something that Ohio State is going to be able to really put its foot down for. Is this a negotiating ploy to say, no, we're not going to do that? So then when you have to do it, you can get other concessions elsewhere. At that point, I don't know, but I know that there's been a lot of people talking about what this 7:30 window is going to look like and where that inventory is going to come from. And if you take what Gene said on that 11 Warriors podcast at face value, it doesn't sound like Ohio State is necessarily going to be playing ball moving forward. But as with anything else, we shall see.
Post those questions and comments, folks. It's June, so you can help us out by producing the show. You get to do that each and every week regardless, but especially with the Super Chat, your comment or question will be recognized a little more easily here in the chat. We appreciate your support. Again, track Steve, track Tony, track Kevin as they produce content through the week, and we will, of course, outline their platforms here throughout the show. We wanted to spotlight, though, one particular faithful viewer and listener here. Kevin, you received a nice comment this week concerning our show.
Yeah, from a longtime viewer of all sorts of Ohio State content, Mika Hanna, who reached out and reached out after one of my shows, but is a loyal viewer of this show here on the Mark Rogers channel, and he wanted me to pass along to Mark and to Steve and to Tony how much he enjoys all the content, and that that he's not able to get to as many games as he would like to, and that this is really a huge a huge source of information and fun for him, and that he enjoys being in the banter and everything else. So, Mika, I just wanted to say in return that we love having you in all of the shows, and keep on watching and keep on commenting, and don't be a stranger. Oh, it's Mika. El Suzapo saying she. I just knew Mika and I had a private conversation at one point on pronunciation of the name, but I didn't know that. So now I got egg on my face. So Mika, I'm sorry, ma'am.
You're good, Kevin. You took one for the team. You were the one that took on that conversation.
Yeah, thanks for walking me out onto the pier. Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.
Well, Mika, thank you so much for reaching out to Kevin. We thank you so much for your loyal support here each and every week. All right. Is there, speaking of Mika, she has a question about Arvell Reese, 2023 linebacker, defensive end. Do you think there's a reason Mika's asking this question about a move in position?
He's a guy that was speculated on when he was a recruit, because he's already like 6'4" and 215 pounds. He's a taller linebacker. I think at this point, though, he's going to stick at linebacker. He's obviously going to gain weight, but what I wouldn't be surprised if he also maybe gets some opportunities at Jack, playing a linebacker and a hybrid. But I think initially he'll be at linebacker, and if he can handle everything, because he looks like a linebacker. He's a linebacker in high school. Showed really good range playing a middle linebacker last year as a senior. And so you didn't really see him rushing the passer much, at least the games that I saw him. So I would expect him to start out at linebacker. And as long as things go well there, that's where he'll stay, with the caveat that maybe you see some Jack usage there.
Based on some recent feedback I've received on my various shows about Brandon Baker, it seems like Brandon Baker is going to play for about 8 schools, because everybody feels confident that they've got a really good shot at what might be the best offensive tackle in the country out of Southern California. Any good leans on Brandon Baker that it's going to make the Buckeye faithful more optimistic going forward on this fine Wednesday?
keeps hitting mute over here. I would not put Ohio State over 50% at this point. I would still sit there and say that Oregon might be the team to beat for him. Again, as it goes with recruiting, get somebody on campus and see where it takes you at this point. But right now, I will truly believe that Ohio State lands a modern day player when Ohio State lands a modern day player, and we go round and round. And there was a hot minute everybody believed that Xavier Brown was going to be in the class, and I don't hear that name mentioned as much. But you get them on a visit, and you see. And the good news is that it's a matter of it only takes one to kind of break through. And could somebody be the one to break through? Because Mater Dei is a traditional powerhouse out there. I know Mater Dei well. It was eight miles away from my high school, so we faced them in the playoffs. And good old Irvine High School is like 0 in infinity against Mater Dei. Never beaten Mater Dei. That's just what it is. And I'm going to still say Oregon at this point. But the nice thing about recruiting is stuff changes, and I may feel differently in a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. We'll see.
Yeah, Brandon Baker, 6'5", 285. I assume he's probably closer to 300 now. From Mater Dei, number one offensive tackle, both in the country, both for 24/7 Sports and in the composite. So it's pretty much a consensus. This is one of the best offensive linemen in the country, and this is the exact type of guy that Ohio State needs to add. They've added the mechanics and the technicians and the pluggers and the grinders. Now they need that pace stringer, Boone, guy who's up there at the top of his class as an offensive lineman to anchor the Paris Johnson per se, a Donovan Jackson type guy that's going to anchor the offensive line for years to come. That's what they're missing. And this is exactly the kind of guy Ohio State fans have been clamoring for Greg Studrawa in years past, and now Justin Fry to break through and land and get that cornerstone guy that you're going to put at left tackle, and know that everything is going to be okay. So, they got Wyatt Davis out of California a few years ago, and I don't know he was quite this highly ranked, but he was certainly top 100 or top 60 or top 50, whatever he was. But, that was under the Studrawa regime. So we'll see if something changes or something develops here with Baker and Georgia, Ohio State, Miami, Michigan, Oregon. Those are some of the top schools I see with him and coming in for a visit. And as Kevin said, make sure that plane arrives on Friday and get him on campus and wine him and dine him and take it from there is how I'd look at it.
We do not have a Michigan Monday like Tony does, and we will outline that when we have everyone outline their platforms. But we do have a Michigan Minute from time to time here at the Voice of College Football, and a lot of Michigan fans took huge exception to my outlining the standing of the series and the rivalry and the.
I thought it was a great breakdown. I really did. I thought you in a 2-minute, monologue, you nailed, I think, what the state of the rivalry really is. I mean, I don't know what else needed to be said.
Well, Steve, I will tell you that Ohio State fans did not take exception to what I thought was a factual rant, did not take exception to historically trailing in the series, which I pointed out, historically having less wins, less Big Ten championships, that Michigan currently owns the series. Ohio State fans did not take exception to that, and they can be a sensitive bunch from time to time. But Michigan fans took, oh, wow, I've got a stream of comments coming back.
The part that since fire was invented, Ohio State's dominated their ass. I don't know, but
so I think I'm going to have fun when my travel plans slow down a little bit. I think I'm going to have fun maybe next week and do a live stream and take up all those comments and take some phone
plumbing
calls.
Was invented since.
And so Ohio State fans, you can join us for that. Tony, let's talk to you a little bit. What's going on? Buckeye Huddle, Buckeye Weekly, the podcast, college football playbook.
So right now, at least with Buckeye Huddle, we just yesterday released our all decade team from the 1990s. We've got a series of 4 shows coming up these next 2 weeks. We're doing the 90s. Tomorrow it'll be the aughts. Next week to be the 2010s, and then we put an all-star team together from those 3 teams. We also kind of pit each of the 90s and the aughts and the 2010 teams against each other to decide which of those 3 teams would actually win. So you can find that Buckeye Weekly right now. Doing I think today or tomorrow, I'm going to be putting together some thoughts piece about what we learned last week from the coaches and other things going on. So you can find that at Buckeye Huddle as well. Posted a story about Taiwan Malone today as well, and what Larry Johnson is expecting from him this season. So you can find that there. And of course, at CFB Playbook on YouTube, working on that and putting stuff there. And there'll be more stuff coming there this summer. So check that out as well.
Kevin, Big Me Podcast, Buckeye Huddle.
Yeah, a little breaking news right now, non-Ohio State related. Just read that the former wrestling great heel, the Iron Sheik, has passed away. So I was putting out a tweet about that. The Sheiky was one of the all-time greats, and he will be
number one.
Yes.
USA. Ha! Poof.
But as for what's going on with Buckeye Huddle and everything else, I've been running a series of final exams from our Southern Swing. We ask players 5 questions outside of the main interview. We've done who's the GOAT of all GOATs in sports. If you could have a superpower, what would it be? And then today we just ran, people would be surprised if they knew what about you. We got 2 more coming to round out the week. Earlier this week, I did a official visit recap with Alex Lightman to talk about recruiting there. And maybe, just maybe I might be able to get another Big Me kickoff posted this week after the Ohio State camp. We will see how beat up by the sun and the turf I am, and if I feel like getting one knocked out tomorrow night.
The GOAT of all GOATs. So we don't want to reveal too much here, but I'm sure Brady gets his play. Tiger Woods gets his play. I'm going Jack Nicklaus myself.
Nobody mentioned Tiger. And you got to remember, we're talking to 15 to 17-year-old football players. So nobody dropped a George Mikan. I mean, none of that was being thrown out there. I mean, and I do kind of know for the most part what the list was. I couldn't tell you how many. You can find all the pieces over at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. But
Mahomes.
No,
football players are tough because they play different positions.
It was heavily weighted toward basketball. It was
so
heavily
LeBron and Michael.
LeBron, Michael. There was a Kobe in there. There were a couple of players who play on the interior defensive line that threw out an Aaron Donald. Somebody mentioned Lawrence Taylor, and there was some Brady comments, but these were guys that were trying to get away with naming 2, and then I put their feet to the fire, and I said, no, you can only pick one, and generally it ended up being either Michael or Michael Jordan or somebody like that.
Okay, that is interesting. The LeBron Michael debate, I think, is a interesting one. I think that's legit, and they both have very distinct accomplishment lists. If you're just talking about accomplishments and not looking at physique and looking at athletes, like in terms of definition of a running, jumping, that sort of thing, has anyone accomplished more on a field versus his contemporaries than Babe Ruth? Has anyone out hit like the rest of Major League Baseball hitting home runs?
And you got to remember, he probably had like a 3 Scotch lunch as well, and was smoking cigars in the dugout while he was doing it. I mean, it was such a different day and everything else, and all the stories out there. Oh, Ty Cobb was such an SOB and everything else. I mean, it was he would actually go out there and sharpen those spikes as much as he could to try and tear up the leg of anybody who was covering second as he was sliding in there and everything else. So. No, I don't disagree. And I think that, those of us who are in our 40s and 50s certainly have maybe a wider perspective in terms of just, following sports longer and opening up the record books. And these guys, and, I guess in 30 years, once they're in their 40s, in their late 40s, may sit there and have a different list.
I'm not going to nail you guys down since you haven't had time to think about the greatest Buckeye football player of all time, but who should
Orlando
be on the
Pace.
short list?
Mine is Orlando Pace. I will also, I think if you have like a Mount Rushmore, you've got Orlando Pace, Archie Griffin. If we're just talking players, I guess Chick Harley probably belongs on there. And then I don't know who the third is that you would want to put up there, and you guys can talk about that. But for me, the best college football player I've ever seen is Orlando Pace, and I know he didn't have any Heismans. He should have had one. Archie is Archie, but for me, I'm going Orlando Pace.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
those are good ones.
how many players have gotten 100? I mean, I know it wasn't 100,000 seats at the time, but Chick Harley, I mean, it's the horseshoes, the house that Harley built. I mean, I never saw him play. You know, I just think in terms of contributions and being a groundbreaker. I mean, where does Bill Willis go in the conversation there? But I didn't get to watch him play. So there are a lot of names out there that, you know, I've watched, you know, cut ups and read about or whatever. But I agree with Tony that really the most dominating player that I have seen at his position, who was, you know, we can talk about, like, to use a baseball stat of WAR, wins above replacement. I mean, Orlando Pace would be the dude.
Eddie George was up there, I think. Chris Spielman, you know, is a folk hero and production wise, I think would be up there on a lot of people's lists. You know, there's a lot of guys. I mean, you could, you know, flash it forward. I mean, I don't know, these national championship teams that they've had here in our time. I don't know if there was anybody on the 02 team who'd be on the Mount Rushmore. You know, is Joey Bosa one of, if not the greatest defensive lineman they've ever had? I don't know. So, you know,
I think Chase Young is maybe the best defensive player I've ever seen at Ohio State, the most dominating defensive player. In 2019, he was amazing.
yeah,
But I do like the Chris Spielman thing, because you're right. The production is there. They're back in the 80s and even into the 90s. Like, Chris Spielman was a legend, a current legend, and then a legend even after his playing days. And shoot, I mean, he got an interview for the head coaching job at Ohio State, having never coached. You know, like, he got to have a sit down with Andy Geiger to you know, to talk about the open position after John Cooper was fired. But I wouldn't have a problem at all putting that fourth guy as Chris Spielman. I think a lot of people just go ahead and put Woody there because the other three are easier. So it's like, oh, you got to have Woody on there. But if you're just doing four players, it becomes a lot more difficult.
And then you also have positions where if you're shown the respect, you don't have any action coming at you, like a Sean Springs. I mean, what happens there? Well, you know, in his final season, I don't really remember a lot of plays going his way, but, you know, I mean, that was, you know, that's something there too. I mean, in terms of maybe just impactfulness to their season, I mean, Chris Gamble, I mean, just was an incredible Iron Man. I mean, with what he was able to do playing both ways, I mean, out there 110 out of 120 plays, I mean, doing everything. I mean, was he Orlando? Was he, you know, some of these other guys? No. But again, I think it's a case of what your criteria is. And I think we could ask 100 people, and 100 people are going to have different criteria. Even if you sit there and you try to put everybody in a box and say, you know, this is what we're looking at. We're all going to have different views. And again, that's why we can sit here and probably do 5 shows on this, because there's just so much Buckeye history to go through.
Ohio State's got plenty of guys in the College Football Hall of Fame, and there are 2 of them on the ballot this year. The letter came out this week. James Laurinaitis, who's now on the sports staff at Ohio State, you know, was an All-American at least twice, maybe 3 times. Yeah, I think maybe 3 times in the mid-2000s. So he won maybe the Nagurski or one of the awards. He won one of those in his sophomore, junior year. And then Chris Ward, who has probably been on this ballot for a good long time, he was an All-American offensive lineman, kind of in the last year or two that Woody Hayes was the coach, like 77, in that range. He was probably the best player on those teams, in the late 70s. I mean, Woody lost his last 3 games to Michigan, 76, 77, and 78. And, was gone, obviously after he punched the Clemson player. But Chris Ward, he's been kind of forgotten over time how good of an offensive lineman he was for those late 70s Ohio State teams. And I'm not sure, if he's going to get voted in or not. But, there are any number of Ohio State players in the Hall of Fame now. And, there's just as part of this wide-ranging discussion, just kind of bring up those guys that are on the ballot for this year. They never like to take more than one guy from a school in any one given year. And usually they don't take guys from a school in back-to-back years, I don't think either. So they try and spread it out as best as they can. So we'll see if either of them survive the cut this year and can get into the Hall of Fame. I guess we'd find that out maybe later this summer.
Should we spread it out, or should we reward the players that earned it?
Well, there's a lot of politics in there in terms of how that is. And Steve hit the point that I wanted to make, that no school can put a guy in back-to-back years. And so it's kind of, who off the list is actually eligible that year. So, if you end up on it and you're in the, Ohio State gets it in the odd years and you're on the even year, you're just, a hat on the table, so to speak, because just the unwritten rules are that you're not going to get in. And that's kind of a problem that I've had with a lot of Hall of Fame setups, is if they have a lot of these hoops that you have to jump through. I think that we should be rewarding the players on merit and not on some circumstance and things like that.
Yeah. I would like college football Hall of Fame guys to be more than just guys who were spectacular in one season. I would think that to be in the College Football Hall of Fame, you should have a minimum of 2 years where you are at or near the top guys at your position across all of college football. And I know that I think they have a rule that you have to have been a first-team All-American at some point in your career to get into the College Football Hall of Fame. And I'm not sure that that's entirely appropriate either, but because I don't know. The old John Havlicek, Jerry Lucas rule.
Give it to us, Tony. Zeke Elliott. He's a Hall of Famer.
Well,
he won the freaking Sullivan Award as the top amateur athlete in America. Give me a break.
Your inclusion into the Hall of Fame shouldn't be dependent on the fact that there are 2 other guys that were also had a great year that year, and that's what the situation is for a running back, or one other guy had a great year, like a quarterback. None of these Ohio State quarterbacks under Ryan Day are eligible because they were never first team All-Americans. And yet, you're Heisman finalists, you're putting up records. And so, the Zeke Elliott thing is one that always bothers me about this, when, somebody like, BJ Sander is eligible, but Ezekiel Elliott isn't. And, no disrespect to BJ Sander. I believe he was an All-American. He won the Ray Guy Award, I believe. But, I think it's okay to you don't have to be so stringent with the rules, and really, not allowing more than one person every 2 years or whatever. That's quite an assumption that there won't be multiple guys, like a guy every single year from Georgia or Alabama, Clemson, where, they've got this lineage of players that are still going to be eligible. And like Chase Young should be a college football Hall of Famer. And, there some of these recruiting classes that are going on now, and the way things are so specialized, there are some programs that probably have a guy every year that could go in for the next 20 years. But now you're saying those guys can't go in for the next 40. Well, what happens in the 40 years between now and when those 20 guys have finally been inducted? I think it creates some problems for sure.
The politics of the whole thing kind of got me. It was maybe 10, 15 years ago. Pat Fitzgerald, who played in the mid-90s at Northwestern and was very involved once he got into coaching with the National Football Foundation Chicago chapter, going to their meetings and, doing whatever, being, a supporter of the foundation, which helps pick the Hall of Famers. He goes into the Hall of Fame before Chris Spielman, who played at Ohio State a decade earlier than him. I believe that was the chronology of how that came down, and that made absolutely no sense to me. So, because first of all, Chris Spielman Pat Fitzgerald, God bless him, was a very good player, and yeah, they had the breakthrough season, and they went to the Rose Bowl with Gary Barnett as the coach and all that. But man, Chris Spielman was twice the player Pat Fitzgerald ever thought he was. So, yeah, let's don't get it twisted, as the kids would say.
Yeah, I'll throw in really quick. They need to have like a veterans committee, like in baseball, for the Baseball Hall of Fame, and work on like getting the backlog of players
Like Chris Ward.
Yes,
Yeah.
so you don't have. I mean, because they're going to be guys that are absolutely worthy, absolutely should be in, who are going to get caught up by the fact that you're bringing younger guys into the conversation, and the voters aren't necessarily up to speed with some of these, guys that would be eligible maybe for like a veterans committee or whatever. I think that would be the way, or you need to have a year where you're like, hey, we're gonna, this is a make good year, and we're going to sit there and we're gonna put 4x what we normally do, because we are deficient in what we have in our enshrined at this point. But who knows? I mean, and certainly we got to talk to some people at College Football Hall of Fame when we were down for the Peach Bowl, and they're all wonderful people. But I think that they need to make some changes.
Definitely worth visiting if you're in Atlanta. Really enjoyed our day we got to spend there for the media day, talking to both teams, and definitely worth a side trip if you're in Atlanta for a game, or even just visiting, to go downtown and see that.
Rules seem to be the way to go when you're raising children, but when you're voting on Hall of Fame credentials, guidelines. Yes, I'm a big believer in guidelines, not rule. 60%. This coach at 60.1% is automatically a better coach and qualified for the Hall of Fame, as opposed to all these various conditions and circumstances involving a Howard Schnellenberger with a 59% winning percentage. Ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, you have Howard Schnellenberger, who won a national championship at Miami, made Louisville relevant in football, and started Florida Atlantic out of whole cloth, or whichever school that was down there.
Yeah, that's going to hurt your winning percentage.
I mean,
You're
that
starting a
guy,
football program.
if there's nobody that should be in the Hall of Fame, that guy ought to be in the Hall of Fame, just as a contributor to the sport and also a winner. I mean, but his overall winning percentage, because he coached for a few years, we had some losing teams, it drove down his percentage, and he's not eligible. Well, I don't find that to be truthful, a good reason.
Yeah.
I do think the one thing that we can all agree on is that Ryan Sandberg is the greatest second baseman in National League history.
Better than Ron Oster?
Ron Oster. Yes.
Did Ernie Banks play short or second? Where did he
Short.
He played short.
Moved to first base late in his career. Very
let's
late.
play two.
Yeah, short.
We don't do enough of anymore, boys, is play two.
No?
But again, the bad thing about playing two is you have more off days, and the worst thing in the world is when my team doesn't have a game on a given day. So because you sit around mope all day, you have no game to look forward to. Like, for instance, tonight I am looking forward to game 2 of the Ellie De La Cruz era at Cincinnati. And not to belabor the point, but I had a ticket to go to see the Columbus Clippers last night against the Louisville Bats, thinking that Ellie De La Cruz was going to be there playing with the Bats. And 6 hours before the game, the Reds pulled him up, and instead they put him in the cleanup spot against the Dodgers last night. And in the first inning of the game, it was Stevenson had a base hit, and De La Cruz was on second base, and they went to the dugout shot, and the guy who was on third base was jogging home, and here's Ellie De La Cruz, the phenom, coming around third, almost lapping the guy who was on third base. And at that point, I just started cackling, laughing, like, it's fun to be a Reds fan again. Here we go. And, looking forward to that tonight. More of the same. And within a year or two, I think this is going to be kind of like a Kansas City Royals situation where you just build it out of minor leaguers, and all of a sudden you've got a team that can win a pennant, maybe, with the Reds. So we'll see how it goes.
I thought you were going to liken
in
it to
5
the
years,
Royals.
It's going to look great in pinstripes when all of them are Yankees.
I was going to say the Cubs or the Dodgers.
There's a writer for the Inquirer who's all pissed off because the closer for the Reds, Diaz, I think it's his brother was the one with the Mets who blew his arm out or whatever, got injured in the World Baseball Classic. Maybe it was his arm. I don't know. Maybe it was his knee.
A leg. Jumping up and down.
Yes, he got injured celebrating in the World Baseball Classic. So people in New York are like demanding that the Reds trade the other brother to New York so he can be on a contender. And one of the Cincinnati writers took complete umbrage to that. Like, these people act like there's only 2 baseball teams, the Mets and the Yankees, and all the good players need to be on. We saw it with Aroldis Chapman. The Reds, took him as far as they could, and then, off to New York to make $26 million a year. So, what can you do?
When you guys get on a roll, I have a backlog of about 18 things I wanted to address. But so Ron Oster, yes, that was an ironic comment you actually made, Steve, because of course he is the guy that replaced the legitimate argument against
Joe Morgan.
Joe Morgan.
Billy Morgan. Ron Oster played 15 years for the Reds, and the only at bat he ever had that mattered, I think he pinch hit in the 1990 World Series and got a hit. That's the only at bat that man ever had that meant anything in 15 seasons. He got a hit when we needed him the most. He was there for us. So
the Billy Hatcher World Series.
Billy Hatcher World Series. Yes.
All right. I'd love to talk baseball for the next 5 hours or so, but we'll get back to it. It sounds like this new player is rivals the speed of the guy you had playing center field, about 10 years ago? Hamilton?
Yeah, Billy Hamilton. Hamilton. Different size, and Hamilton was a shorter guy. This guy's 6'5", and he's an infielder. He's got a cannon. I guess they said in the minor leagues he threw a ball from shortstop 102 miles per hour over to first base. They had him at third base last night. I think he can scale tall buildings in a single bound. I don't think there's anything this guy can't do. They managed the velocity of the ball coming off the bat. He hit a ball for Louisville this year, and I don't know the exact, maybe 112 miles per hour, the exit velocity. It is the single hardest hit ball by anybody in professional baseball this season. And last night he hit a double up the gap, which is the single hardest hit ball by anybody on the Reds so far this season. It was the first time he put a ball into fair territory. So we're looking for more of that, maybe 3 times tonight. That'd be great.
Well, what he can't do is on his very first defensive play, he got handcuffed by a shot down the line, and he wasn't able to come up clean with it. And
yeah, tough play.
All right, I'm ready to talk football because the Dodgers bullpen pooped the bed last night, and they walked a guy who was hitting 172. I mean, Price, throw a beach ball up there for Pete's sake.
I'll give you one of these last 2, Kev, just to say I'm being sporting. You can have one of the last 2 games. That's what you can have.
Oh, you're a real prince.
Yeah.
Going way back, my point on Orlando Pace, that was 3 hours ago. While the argument for these players being great college players needs to stay with their college accomplishments, of course, a lot of people get it mixed up and they either taint their careers based on their bust status at the NFL level, not bust as in Hall of Fame, but boomer bust status, or otherwise. The great thing about Orlando Pace is still separating the college and the pro career because there aren't statistics for an offensive lineman. He basically validated, in a sense, to say, this is what we did see in college, is he was able to do this to grown men for 15 years in the NFL to the point where he was a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yep. Won a Super Bowl with the Rams, no doubt. Yep.
And would hold out every mini camp because he didn't need it.
This is a great question. Now, this is always great for baseball, and because of the styles of the sport that changes through the years. Of course, nobody's going to break Christy Mathewson's win total of 41 in a season or anything like that. But Jordan Kapler asking here, If you could break one stat at Ohio State, what would it be?
Most NIL money.
Kevin
That'd
took
be a
it
good one.
personally. Yes,
That
you
would be a good one.
choose that.
Oh man.
I'm looking at the OSU record book right now, and Trey Sermon's 271 yards rushing in one half is pretty good in the Big Ten championship game against Northwestern. That's ridiculous. Maybe the record that will never be broken is the number of punts in a game by Les Horvath with 21 in the Snow Bowl, or Vic Janowicz rather. So yeah. So I would that would be a record that will never be broken. So if you want to break one that's never going to be broken, that would be one. The record is 21, and the second most is 11, to give you an idea of how much further. So that's one. Here's an interesting one. The tackles for loss in a game, the record is 5, and it's held by guys like Chase Young and Ryan Shazier and John Simon. And so if you could get 6 and be one ahead of those guys, Andy Katzenmoyer in that list as well, that would be a pretty lofty crew.
Yeah, I think the rushing award or record that Archie set is going to be a hard one, because no one's going to play more than 3 years. And it's just impossible to take that kind of beating at this level of college football right now, with the physicality that we saw last year with Henderson and Williams. Neither of them could play more than one back-to-back game. I mean, it was like they'd come back for a game and miss the next one. So, it's almost impossible to expect somebody to do what he did. And JT Barrett put up some records that I think, under the same premise, are going to be difficult to break, with touchdowns responsible for, probably passing touchdowns, and so on, just because no one's going to start more than 2 years at Ohio State, before they head off to the NFL. So, you'd have to be a true freshman, sophomore, and junior starter to threaten any of that. You'd have to be extremely prolific to do what he did in 3.5 years as the starter. So, yeah, it's those are some records that are going to be tough. I think the receiving records that Jackson Smith-Njigba set in the Rose Bowl are going to be difficult unless they can get an opponent to agree to put offensive players back out there on defense like Utah did for them in the Rose Bowl. So, but I digress.
I think the 31 consecutive 100-yard rushing games by Archie, while technically, mathematically, that could be done with a 3-year player, I don't ever expect that to be broken. Ezekiel Elliott is second on that list with 15, just to give you an idea.
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone at the running back position is going to get enough reps to get 25 rushing touchdowns to match Peach Johnson. That's difficult to see.
And it was a specialty position too, getting them all from the 3-yard line. It wasn't like he was taking a handoff from the 30 and going in.
Although it surprises me, or it did at one point, to see that he ran for nearly as many yards that, Archie was around 1,500, and Pete Johnson eclipsed 1,000 that season. I don't know who should have won the Heisman Trophy there.
Pete Johnson, 2,308 yards, career rushing yards. So
Richard is taking us down the path of a very general analysis of the way things are shaking out. Of course, we know that Michigan is challenging Ohio State in recruiting for the first time in a long time. And just your impressions of how recruiting is shaping up between the two schools.
Well, I'm looking at their class right now, and I will say that part of it is a case of Michigan has 17 kids, Ohio State has 13 kids. So when you're basing recruiting rankings off of points, Michigan is going to have an edge or be right there because of just having more data points in there. So I think that once the classes come together, though, I think Ohio State will still have the top class in the nation. I think that Michigan certainly is this is one of the classes that I look at them and I'm like, okay, I can see that guy and I can see that guy. They're not necessarily going up and recruiting Connecticut and Massachusetts, which has been kind of a true yet long running joke in terms of them trying to lock down an area that is probably better known for producing lacrosse players than football players. Yet they do, as I have their class up, do have two guys from Connecticut. So maybe I should take that comment back. But I think that we'll know a lot more about Ohio State's class by the end of this month, certainly by the end of next month, as it's the big official visit weekend. But if Michigan's able to get somebody like Taylor Tatum, who is a really talented 4-star running back, I think that would be somebody really nice to have on the heels of a Donovan Edwards. I'm curious to see, what Jaden Davis, the quarterback, as a 5-star right now, what he is able to kind of bring in with him. But I think that Michigan has maybe readdressed its recruiting efforts a little bit and changed some things around. And I think that they're going to be very much a number 2 to Ohio State's number 1, and then there's probably going to be a pretty wide gap with the rest of the league.
There was a lot of hand-wringing in Buckeye Nation. Jeremiah Smith, the big-time wide receiver, took all the Ohio State stuff off of his timeline, I guess, or his Twitter profile. I don't know, maybe Instagram. I'm not sure. And maybe making some visits or a visit somewhere else. So, but, at the same time, seemed to indicate he was still a Buckeye lock. So take all of that with a grain of salt, I guess, and that will definitely color what the ranking of this Ohio State class will be, because he's like the number 2 overall player in America behind the quarterback Raiola. So to me, that's going to enter this discussion whether Smith sticks with Ohio State. They can't sign for another 6 months. So going to be a lot of sweating going on over there, but in Brian Hartline, you trust, and he makes multimillionaires out of everything he touches. So there you go.
I will say last year, Michigan, according to the 24/7 composite, signed 11 4-5-star guys. That's the same number they have committed right now. So, and it's a better number than I think they did in 2021 when they only had 10. So they're, doing quite well. And anytime you can get a 5-star quarterback in there, and hopefully that guy brings in others, you're doing well. But I'm with Kevin. I think you'll see Ohio State eventually overtake Michigan's recruiting in the rankings, and especially with this is going to be a big class for Ohio State, so they'll catch up numbers wise, and the average rank per recruit I think will be higher. And I don't know if we want to address the David Greenshield here.
Absolutely.
I'm let me see if I can bring up, because I think I did a for 2000, but I don't know that we actually decided to go, because at 2000 I think we may have gone a running back, 3 receivers, and a tight end. And I'm just looking real quick to see if I can bring that up for you. Yeah, I got it here. My 2000s, I did go with a fullback, and so exciting news there. And I think there's a fullback worthy in the early 2000s.
Okay, I can think of a few. Check out Tony's list, and that's currently available.
The 2000s will be coming out tomorrow.
Okay,
tomorrow morning.
Good stuff. We had a question about a few recruits. Now I've lost track of them. Damarian Witten was one of them. Don't know if you guys have anything.
Buckeye. He'll be a Buckeye. He released a top 5. As long as Ohio State somehow doesn't change its mind, Ohio State's not going to pass on a Glenville guy that, as Glenville suddenly has become, a target-rich environment again. I think that they'll land Damarian Witten as well as Bryce West.
Justin Courtney believes the sheer volume of commitments, he's predicting close to 30 for Michigan, is going to keep them higher in the rankings. Again,
That's not how it works. Most recruiting rankings work on the top 20 guys in your class. So, what that means is that by having more than 20, you'll drop your lowest guys or whatever, but you're not going to have, you don't keep adding to it in a class that has 30. which I think you can only really get to 28, to be quite honest. But you don't keep adding points. And honestly, in my opinion, I think average star ranking, if you're gonna completely buy into recruiting rankings as the end all be all, average star ranking means a lot more to me than total points in an equation.
Well, you bring up a good topic there, Kevin. So obviously that's a base. The recruiting rankings, I'm a big believer in the recruiting rankings, but they're not everything. So if you were just blindly given a list of the 2024 recruiting rankings at the conclusion, after looking at per player value and the overall point total, where are you going next to try to determine if anyone was undervalued or overvalued as a team?
I was going to see if anybody else was going to jump in, so I don't have to be the de facto recruiting guy or whatever. I mean, can you kind of restate that?
Well, this goes for everyone. Well, you just made the statement about the recruiting rankings being, if you're a believer in the recruiting rankings. So, where else are you going besides your own personal evaluation of every individual player? Are there any other indicators that are telling you that a class may be better or worse than their just recruiting ranking? What are your other indicators?
I look at offer lists on a lot of kids too. I mean, Ohio State does not meet with the recruiting services and sign off on what the rankings should be. Michigan, Florida, whoever the hell doesn't do that. And and I know sometimes offer lists can be deceiving because lo and behold, sometimes kids may embellish their offer list. Lo and behold, some slappy may not put like 5 offers on some kid's profile, so you don't see it. So you don't necessarily know. But I can sit there and I could look at somebody like Elijah Moore, who just took an official visit to Ohio State, a wide receiver, 6'4", 190 out of only Maryland. Good counsel. I can tell you right now, he is not a 3-star. He is not a 3-star. He is a top 125 at worst type of guy. I would probably have him in my top 100. And, I can look at his offer list. I look at his tape and everything else. And while I'm not an evaluator and I don't claim to play one on television, I've been doing this long enough that I kind of understand how the process works, and I kind of understand what a 3-star looks like, what a 4-star looks like, and what a 5-star looks like. So I don't necessarily always buy into the rankings when I see them. I try to do kind of my own homework. I've said this time and time again, I would never want to be a national evaluator. It is a thankless job. How do you sit there and determine if this wide receiver is better than this defensive tackle in a numerical ranking? You're splitting hairs, but I certainly have my disagreements with the rankings when I see them.
I think those guys do a phenomenal job just considering the age of the player versus what their NFL counterparts are doing with just a greater sample size when these guys are almost fully mature and playing like competition.
Well, just to Justin's comment, and then I'll bow out on this and allow everybody else to talk. I'm taking all bets right now that Ohio State will be ranked higher than Michigan at the end of the recruiting cycle. Once we get through February signing day and everything else, and Ohio State finishes in December, we know that maybe they pursue 1 or 2 kids at the end. I'll take all bets. I'm that confident in it. I don't care what the rankings are, as long as we agree upon criteria of what it is. I mean, I know how all the formulas work to a certain extent. Ohio State is sitting 4 kids down in terms of total numbers at this point. Ohio State will have the higher ranked recruiting class, period.
I saw somebody ask for something about the last time Michigan was in the top 5 or whatever. Last time they were in the top 5 of the composite class rankings was 2017 when they were 5. Last time they were inside the top 5 was 2013 when they were 4. I've gone back to 2010 and they don't get any better. So try to go back further, but 24/7, the composite ranking sites beyond that aren't loading. But it's been a while since they've been inside the top 5. That's why you don't expect it. Yeah. And the SEC always comes like their conserving their energy, and then down the home stretch is really when they start to kick it in.
Yeah, they start in October. I mean, that's when does Alabama really start giving a crap about recruiting? October, maybe November. I mean, it's just kind of how it works out. And I think that certainly the hope was that we're going to bring in an early signing period to kind of alleviate some of that. Well, then some genius decided that 6 weeks earlier was like an early signing period. The early signing period needs to be like in August, honestly, if you're going to have one. And by doing that, you're not necessarily helping Ohio State, or you're not helping Alabama or whatever. You're helping some of these smaller schools that find a guy and getting them signed before they blow up their senior year.
Yeah, Alabama has the number 13 class right now with 8 commits, and 3 of them are 5-star. So,
Yeah, that's the way it's done down there. And those schools are also involved in the drama on National Signing Day, more so than Ohio State being all set and buttoned up at that point. Appreciate everybody being here at Buckeyes Live. We're typically here every Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and is typically the case. We've got the most people on here watching at the end of the show, so please just keep it locked in right here. You can watch the rest of the show and catch up with what you missed. We got Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts 247 Sports. Tony Gerdeman, you got to catch his work at College Football Playbook. This is a new venture. Anything interesting there that's been recently released?
Kevin, are you sure? Have we done anything there recently? Because it's more. We've got some summer stuff coming.
We got it. Stay tuned, but nothing has dropped in the last couple few. So it's coming. It's still very much a project that we're getting up off the ground, and we get so much stuff on our own channel that sometimes we need to kind of remember to steer some stuff to Playbook.
And Kevin, I apologize for not including College Football Playbook on your byline. That was something Tony brought to my attention. Didn't know that you were that heavily involved.
He's just a glory hog. I don't know.
Squeaky wheel, Tony. All right. Guys, appreciate it. We will make it on back here at some point next week, typically on Wednesday, folks. So lock it in. Please subscribe, and we will see you all next week.